Power Rankings Pod with Dan and Harris. Today's episode is sponsored by a 2002 Toyota Highlander with 200,000 miles. It's right outside on the street. Come pick it up today.
Yeah, this car has actually just been on the market for about 8 months. No one's really biting. It's desperate that we get this thing sold. So, hey, that's our sponsor today. I'm glad you guys are listening. And you know what? It's a great car. It doesn't go very far, but it gets you where you need to go.
So, Harris, I think probably the best way to start today's pod is with a little recap of week 2. You mind if I go into that?
Oh, please, yeah. Let's take a look at these matchups.
The first matchup we're going to talk about this week is the Noah McCaskills against the Torn ACLs. The Noah McCaskills beat the Torn ACLs 876 to 816. Russell Westbrook and Karl Anthony Towns led the way for Noah's team, and he also got some stellar production out of Rookie of the Year frontrunner Scotty Barnes, fourth-year man Mo Bamba, the rich one himself, and the most meme player of the year yet up to this point, Kyle Kuzma. The Torn ACLs were unlucky to face Noah this week, as they were the 5th best performing team in the overall fantasy points category with 816 points. Jimmy Butler was elite, scoring 170 fantasy points on the week, and so were Luka and OG Anunoby, both scoring over 100 fantasy points. The second matchup we're going to talk about is the second highest scoring matchup of the week, the Freaks and Greeks against the Interdimension Astars. The Greeks took down the Astars 858 to 754. The Greeks entered the one-win club behind Giannis, who had 177 fantasy points, Trez, who had 129, Spida with 101, and Cole Anthony, who also had 101 points on the week. The Interdimension Astars saw some great production from Rudy Gobert, who had 131 fantasy points on the week, but none of his other players crossed the 100 fantasy point threshold for week 2. Moving on to the third highest scoring matchup of the week, the Beads beat Cuz Lightyear 837 to 789. The Beads scoring came from DeJounte Murray with 123, the bonus 2 shots with 121, and 114 from Miles Bridges. Although Josh lost, which is weird because his team is the best, he did find some powerful outputs from Kevin Durant with 132 fantasy points and John Collins with 117. Up next in the matchups, and also with the name, was Up Next against Swaggy Prov. Up Next took down Swaggy Prov 831 to 697. Kieran's great week came from Jokic with 154 fantasy points, Fred VanVleet with 118 fantasy points, Tobias Harris with 91 in only 3 games played. Not a single one of Prov's players scored more than 100 fantasy points in the week, including the likes of Nikola Vucevic, Damian Lillard, and Bam Adebayo. The next highest scoring matchup was the Tycons against Next Up. The Tycons prevailed 809 to 743. Although the Tycons only had one player score over 100 points this week, which might normally be a sign of trouble, depth prevailed for them. The Tycons' top scorers in the week were Trey with 125, Paul George with 87, and Miles Turner with 87. DeAndre Ayton also put up 71 points in just 2 games. That's some good efficiency right there. Gary, on the other hand, was a little too top-heavy this week, seeing Jonas Valanciunas with 151 fantasy points, but the next highest scorers were Ja Morant with 92 and Gordon Hayward with 96. De'Aaron Fox has got to get better. He's got to give, and I think he will. The last matchup of the week I want to talk about was the lowest scoring matchup of the week, the Jays against Casey's bare ass. And God, the Jays did give Casey's bare ass a whooping. 702 to 688. The Jays were extremely top-heavy this week, seeing great production out of Anthony Davis with 137 and James Harden with 129. About the only positive thing to come out of Casey's team this week was some improved play from Bradley Beal, who put up 104 points on the week. Looking forward to week 3, and I'm going to send it over to Harris.
All right, now that we took a look through what all the matchups from the past week looked like, let's get into the actual power rankings. Starting from the bottom, we're going to be looking at Swaggy Prov and the boys. So far, Prov's just scored 1.3 more points than David's team on the season, right at the bottom of scoring. Low-scoring teaming is going to come last in the rankings, and overall season outlook due in large part to not having a single player averaging more than 30 fantasy points so far on the season. While Prov has a handful of players averaging over 20, he still only has 2 players that are above 25 for the season. That's concerning for any team looking to compete. The one standout, though, is the consistency of some of the players. You can look to expect some similar numbers from all of Alonzo, LeBron White, Bam, Dame, once he does turn it around, Vooch, and even Mason Plumlee on a given night. Hopefully that consistency can turn things around for Prob and his boys. Number 11th, though, we're going with the Jays. The team with James, Jalen, Jordan, other Jalen, Jaren, and John hasn't had the hottest start to the year as the lowest scoring team so far. Even with some impressive averages from James Harden, Anthony Davis, and Jaylen Browns, and boring Al Horford, the rest of David's roster lacks some serious depth. However, with the return of Cade and an eventual return of Klay Thompson, maybe we could see this team turn around. I don't really see it happening anytime soon, but with the Celtics stinking this year, maybe David's going to have some more time than expected to work on his roster. Then, number 10, we have the torn ACLs. Just a quick reminder, everyone, because you know that he's going to remind you himself anyway, Luke has started 0-2 before and finishes the 1 seed in previous fantasy seasons. That said, Luke falls low on this list as the 4th lowest scorer in the league so far. Although we saw some disappointing play from Luka this past week, he still has Luka. Couple that with the fact that so far Jimmy Butler has the 4th highest fantasy average for any player this season, and the Lord of Time, who's had as hot a start to the season as anyone, you can't count Luke out. We'll wait for the record to turn around before we really close the book on this 1x chip, 2x finals appearances team, but for right now, he's sitting pretty low in the rankings. Number 9, next up. The team with the Draftwords logo comes in at number 9 currently. While it is Gary's turn to win the league this year, his roster doesn't seem to be on the same page. He's gotten some awesome starts out of both Ja and Jonas Valanciunas, but the heart and soul of the team, De'Aaron Fox, has had a lackluster start to the season. That said, this team can get spooky real quick, so if Fox picks it up and once Zion comes back, we can expect some sort of turnaround from Gary. Number 8 is the Interdimension Ass-Stars. Newcomer Tommy Schlamy Holcomb has been all over each iterations of the power rankings so far this season. Came in bottom, last week he was top, now he's smack dab in the middle. So, however, after week 2, I think we have a better idea of what Tommy actually brings to the table this season. His core of LaMelo, Tatum, Malky Broggy, Ruthless Gobert, Dinwiddie Coin, and the Black Falcon have ever-consistent scoring numbers that can compete with anyone in the league. That said, he seems to be lacking for depth. That shouldn't be too big of an issue in a plays format, but let's be cautiously optimistic about the Ass Stars for now. Then, coming in at number 7 is another ass team, Casey Bear Ass. One stat about Casey's team I don't want anyone to forget is that he's leading the league in trades this season with every intention to keep that record going strong. Despite the high trade numbers, though, Casey's roster still has some improvement to be made. He's deep with 7 guys averaging over 20 fantasy points, but after the trade that went through today, sending Steph Curry over to Josh's team, none of the guys on his team are averaging above 30, which is concerning for any team with title aspirations. That said, now that his main core is Brad Beal, Zach LaVine, and Middleton, very boring as well, you can entirely expect those guys to pick up the scoring and maybe get above the 30-point baseline that I think is good for a competing team. But we'll have to be cautiously optimistic again until we see that actually come into fruition. Then, number 6, we have Up Next. To be honest, the whole up next up thing continues to confuse the fuck out of me. Regardless, Kieran is here this season for both the memes and to compete. His team is currently 3rd in scoring thanks in large part to his core of Jokic, Julie Randy, and Jakob Poeltl. I wanted Jakob myself and sent Kieran a few death threats after taking that man from me in the draft, so you best believe I'm both high on that guy and Kieran's roster overall. Number 5, though, coming in, Cuz Lightyear. Another week where Josh is still the best, even at 5th on the list. Josh just pulled off the trade, as mentioned before, to land himself a real-life legendary big 3 of LeBron, KD, and Steph. But with that sort of firepower, you can expect this team to compete every week, except that I think that it might have taken a hit at Josh's depth moving forward. Outside of the big 3, his next best players are John Collins and Kemba Walker. Regardless, you'll be sure that Kelly Oubre will consistently be the best-dressed guy on Josh's roster all year long, especially if Josh starts working with him in the near future. Coming in number 4 is Beats. So, my high ranking in this list seems to be because I just have some firepower at the top of the roster with DeJounte Murray, the bonus, 2 shots, Joel, Hulu as live sports Embiid, and surprisingly, Miles Bridges all averaging over 30 fantasy points to start the season. Then, couple that with the excellent bench support of Enes Kanter, who's averaging a hearty 4 DMPs a week along with 7 claps per game. It shoots me really high up despite the 1-1 record. If we can see some improvement from the anti-vax squad leader, Michael Porter Jr., who knows where the beats can land. Then, top 3. Freaks and Greeks. Dan hasn't made a trade yet this season, very surprising, and it showed in his early season scoring. Normally, seeing a slightly underperforming, averaging only 24 fantasy points on the season, Spida Mitchell, would have led Dan to recklessly trade him for someone like the high-flying Ricky Rubio. But Dan's restraint, along with having Giannis again, and an impressive bounce-back season from Montrez on his team, means that he's set for some long-term success. Then, coming in at number 2, Noah McAskills. Noah's impressive scoring displays to power his team to a strong 2-0 start after what many had claimed was a poor draft, even with some people exclaiming, "I can't believe Casey got Noah so high to sabotage his draft," is nothing short of impressive. Noah continues to get impressive scoring from a young roster led by none other than Kyle of Kuzmania fame. With Kyrie maybe somehow, potentially at some point, possibly, poised to return, in this 35-play format league, Noah's in a pretty strong position to keep up the pace as long as his young guys do too. Then, number 1. Number 2 pencils, the Ticonderogas. While the Ticons may not have the usual top-heavy, multiple 35-plus fantasy point average players on their roster, they more than make up for it in depth this year. Of course, Trey, Paul George, and CP3 are standouts, but the deep roster featuring Draymond, DeAndre Ayton, Jared Allen, Miles Teller, and even Kelly Olynyk show that they're the team to beat at the moment.
Well, that brings us to the end of our pod for week 2 of the Power Rankings pod. I'd like to thank you all for listening. Thank our sponsor, 2002 Toyota Highlander, that's out front right there waiting for us. And to thank my co-host, Harris.
Yep, seriously, please just someone buy this car once.
We can't get any other people to pay us for ads until we sell this car.
Yeah, you're probably going to be hearing this in the next week, the week after. Just get the car now. Get the sponsor out of here. We need a new one in.
Sell it for parts.
Please.
Thanks. Come again next week.